founder and chairman, Manav Tharaki.
Good morning. Hopefully we get a few more people in. So hopefully you had keep the doors open so that people know for the first few minutes. Hopefully you had a wonderful evening. I want to just thank Marriott and particularly the Western Nusa Dua team for really putting up a great show. And I just want to also kind of highlight yesterday's day. So I don't know if, yeah, there we go. Maybe I'll just thank you. Today we are looking forward to a full day of events out here. This evening we're being hosted at Potato Head, so thank you. We decided to do away with the buses, so we'll be using taxis. Hopefully will help us navigate the location a little easier and quicker with taxis. So when we finish this evening, we'll just put everyone, 3 to 4 people in a taxi and send you out there, and we'll take it from there. Do use our app for voting and for other things, because it's also great. We saw people asking questions, so if you have questions, you can go to the app and ask people questions, and we show them out there. Today I'm going to talk a little bit about F&B, food for thought. And this has become a pet subject for me personally, because apart from my running Hotellerate as a consulting firm and having some hotels, I've also got into the F&B space as an independent F&B person, and I see such a difference between how hotels run F&B and how people who don't have the backing and the support of a hotel who run F&B. So I wanted to kind of get into that. And the F&B business is kind of, it's a big business. It's 6,500 people globally that are out there. Can I make sure I have my camera out here, please? There. Thank you. We have, and it's projected to grow to 7,000 billion number, and then grow up. So this is a huge number if you think of how big. It's probably one of the biggest sectors globally when it comes to F&B, right? And when you go and talk to hoteliers, most of them will tell you that, particularly for large hotels, like something like the Sofitel, or if you're at the Potato Head, a larger portion of your revenue is coming from F&B, and in many places, it's at least 30 to 50%. Yet, we don't in hotels ever talk about revenue management for F&B. When was the last time we heard revenue management experts coming in, we say, use different tools. But when it comes to F&B, there's hardly any discussion within hotels. When you look at budgets, the fight is always about the, Jasper's here, STR, are you RevPAR 1, RevPAR 2, where are you in that segment? That never happens with the F&B, it never happens with restaurants. And it's a shame, because that's still 30 to 60% of your revenue in many cases, and there's not much being done about it. And a lot of times the F&B revenue is driven because of wedding revenues, right? And particularly again, if you're in Bali, I know this hotel alone does, 35 to 45 weddings a year. And that's the big business. So when we talk about F&B, a lot of times that F&B discussion is stuck on just the wedding business as a segment. Yes, it's a big, big business, about the ID, interior design, and so forth, and the brands are saying, oh, we as a brand standard, we need to have 3 restaurants or 4 restaurants or 2 restaurants, and yet, a lot of time that's dead space, and that space could have been utilized more effectively for a more revenue generating area than a restaurant. So, and then when you look at the independent guys, right, for them, it's a real life situation of survival. They have to pay rent, they have utility bills, they have maintenance, they have licensing issues, talent shortages because they're getting pushed from the next guy who's opening a restaurant, security, these are all real issues for a standalone restaurant guy. And these issues are not necessarily there in hotels. And yet, there are hotels that have multiple restaurants which are empty, or those restaurants are not open during the lunchtime because they're specialty restaurants and so forth. And then when you talk to the F&B guys, the only 3 things that they usually look at is, okay, that's my top line, what's my average check, and number of covers. Those are the only 3 parameters they're looking at most of the time. And there's no discussion happening on those parameters. There's no comparison happening necessarily with who your comp set is and so forth, right? Because it just, in most cases, doesn't happen. There may be a few hotels, and there will be a few hotels that maybe do that extra effort to figure things out, but it doesn't necessarily happen. I think there's a fundamental problem with the way the industry has grown in the last 2 decades. There is not that much focus with general managers understanding how F&B and how they should be trained to think. They don't think of restaurants as independent profit centers. I can tell you today that if we actually went to most hotels and asked them to look at how their restaurants are being run, and we asked them to look at the profitability of those restaurants, and we added a rent component of, let's say, 12%, we added a utility component to it, we added a few other components which every restaurant actually is paying, but it's notional, most hotel restaurants will be failing, and they will be unprofitable. So I think that's something, that mindset has not crept in, and we need to look at that. Look, and that brings me to the point, right? Why do hotels insist on multiple restaurants? Why are we not outsourcing restaurants to other independent guys? What can we do to make restaurants flourish? And these are things that I think I just want to put food for thought. I don't have solutions for everything, but I want people to start thinking. I want owners to start thinking of when that brand comes and says we need to have 3 restaurants. Well, I think you need to have a discussion at that time and say, why do we need those 3 restaurants? Why not that one? Yes, you need that one because you have to serve breakfast, lunch, and dinner, but in a luxury hotel, you really need that second and third, and if you do need it, let's bring in a specialist who can do that. Just some quick numbers on Indonesia. I'm not too sure we pulled it off from a source, but again, it is a growing business. Obviously, this is the organized sector. This does not include the photographs that I took of the high streets and where people go for street food, which, by the way, I think is still the best food in Indonesia in many ways. And then, where has that growth come from? And I just wanted to very quickly put some numbers out there. Look, I just wanted to kind of put this poll question, and I wanted to encourage people to use the poll that we have, right? How many of you, and please go out there and vote, and we look at the number later today at the end, right? How many of you have actually gone to a destination wedding in the last 10 years? And I wanted to just figure that out and see where we land up. But at least in many markets that we cover, Indonesia being one of them, India being land of the wedding, and I think we just finished with the wedding of the century in India, which was quite ridiculous, but in terms which is right. So this look at the number, right? $27 billion was spent on just the wedding market in hotels, and that is expected to reach 36 billion this year. A billion of it was spent in one wedding in India. That's a different thing. So they kind of really moved the needle. But it's big business. It's big business for this hotel. It's big business for a lot of hotels in Bali. It's big business in many countries where this is going. So while there is a need to focus on it, and it's becoming more sophisticated because you have got these wedding planners coming in. They're doing a lot of bringing a lot of entertainment. But it's great money for hotels because they do buyouts. I know that this hotel also has maybe 6 to 8 buyouts a year for weddings, and I'm sure there are other hotels that have the same thing. So what are some of the challenges that I see that are facing the F&B industry, right? One is there is a market saturation. There is an oversupply of restaurants and competition. You know, I grew up in New York City when I was studying at NYU, and we were told that out of every 10 restaurants that open in New York, only 2 will survive after 2 years, and maybe 1 would survive after 5 or 7 years. That hasn't changed, and that I'm finding that now being applicable to many other countries, right? The number of restaurants that open because people just want to be in that space, it gives them a high, but the number of failures is equally, if not 7 or 8 times that strong, because most independent restaurants do fail, and there's not much thought about it. You'll create a restaurant, you'll bring in a chef will run away one fine afternoon or morning, and you're left with a restaurant with no chef. I mean, these are practical problems. Or your rent is too high. That's the biggest mistake as an independent, is when your rent is too high and you can't afford it. Challenges around sustainability in many markets, you know, the kind of products you use, particularly if you're in the delivery market. I know a few months ago there was a law which came into one of the markets where they can't use plastic, you can't use this, and suddenly the whole delivery model had to be changed because people had not given it too much thought. So you could have reasons which are beyond your control that bring in, which make that business that much more difficult. And then of course the whole thing about waste management and how do you dispose of, right? There are a lot of hungry people around the world, and yet the F&B industry is got a bad reputation for wasting a lot of food. And I'm not too sure if everyone is doing enough about it. So that's something which is some of the challenges that are facing us. Key drivers, clearly the tourism boom is something that is, you know, making F&B more distinct. You go today to Bangkok because it's a great F&B city, right? We've got 25+ Michelin star restaurants. You have a culinary people. You come to India and you go to some of the older parts of Delhi. You're there because you're wanting to experience and try out different types of cuisine, which is very different. So there is a lot of countries that are focusing on bringing people from a tourist point of view and expanding the F&B operations, right? Cultural fusion, this word fusion was not there maybe 15 years ago, but today you have Indo-Japanese, that's one of the restaurants that I own, or you have French Vietnamese, or you know, you'll mix the food up, and that's becoming quite exciting when you think about it. And then of course, the role of new hotels, driving restaurants, driving F&B growth is also taking place. I think it's very important when you are getting into the space, you understand the consumer preferences. I think it's also very important that we have a better idea of regional market dynamics. And you know, one of the things we've been doing more recently is looking at, you know, there's a hotel which has a restaurant that's not working. You try and figure out how can you make it work better. You then you try and make changes. So I think you need to do your homework before you actually get into the space. I think the impact of online, digital technology is massive, right? Today, it's no longer about opening a restaurant and expecting people to walk in, because you're competing not with 10 restaurants, but you're competing with 1,000 restaurants that are in the same city, right? And the war on the customer, on who you can bring in, is being done through social media and influencers. And that is that's been my biggest learning. If you want to have a successful restaurant, you better have a very strong online presence, and influencers who are talking about your restaurants and so forth. Yes, food delivery service has become a big offering, which wasn't there 10 years ago. That's a great way to expand the base of F&B revenues, and that's something which has come handy for a lot of mid-segment to restaurants, but obviously cannot work in the luxury space. Current quick F&B trends, health and wellness. I spoke about local sourcing, and sustainability is becoming big because we want to avoid bringing food from different parts. So if you're in Bali, you'll want to eat in Bali, or you want to have cuisines that's grown out here rather than being brought from outside. And then I spoke briefly about fusion and so forth. Future prospects, again, you have to be innovative, you have to bring in technology into it. I was in Bangalore recently, which is a high-tech place, and someone said, can we start a bar, and at the bar, can we have a robot sitting? And often people go, I won't say men or women, they go to a bar and they don't know who to talk to. And this person wants to have a couple of robots, and they were putting masks on the robot to see that they look like real people. And you can actually now go to the bar and talk to the robot. And the robot will always be polite. You can have them be a little bit more flirty. You can customize it, right? And look, that's where the industry is going. It's cool. Because at some stage, that will become the norm, maybe in 3 years, 5 years' time, right? But why can't we think out of the box? So that's the technology integration, and then of course, I spoke about eco-friendly things. Before I get off stage, I have a few minutes. I thought I'll just talk about some of my popular restaurants in Bali that I like and around the region. Sardines, I was here. I went and ate there 2 days ago. It's one of my favorites in Seminyak. By the way, this used to look like this. They have now put some fluorescent lights, and I don't have a photograph of it. It's called the La Toilette, if I'm pronouncing it correct. And they've converted the toilet into a nightclub, right? And they still left one seat out there as a memory piece. But these are things that you can talk about, and Bamboo is another place. If some of you have been attending our conference for the few years, we did an evening cocktail at Bamboo Seminyak. I think in 2018 or 19, I'm not too sure. I think 19 was the year we did this out there. Kamala Jungle Pool, Ubud, Mosaic in Ubud. Again, just some quick photographs. Last year we did some of us did a private dinner at the Coral when we were at the Kipinski. I don't know if some of you got a chance. This is an underwater restaurant with a lot of the fish all over you. Again, really interesting, and the food was quite nice. And these are some of the things. So that is Bali. And all-time favorite, for those of you who have been around, if you've been to the peninsula out in Hong Kong, great old style, you get your cigar out, and an evergreen location. Yankee, Rohit brought it up yesterday when he was talking about it, but really one of my favorite current restaurants in Bangkok. Souk Station, this is again an interesting concept. It's an old building that has been converted into a restaurant. Sing Sing, one of my favorite nightclubs. You have these performers in Bangkok coming in, dancing. It's just a theater. It's a performance theater. While you're drinking, there's not much food being served, but you have people dancing, and it's always full. And the good thing is, it's been there for 9-10 years, so that's a clear indication of the success. Dagan, part of the Michelin star restaurants, Indian, does extremely well in Bangkok. I think was voted in the top 2 or 3 restaurants in Asia right now. Havana Social, again a nightclub. This is again by So Hospitality. You go to the bathroom and there's a Fidel Castro speech going on in the background. It's just different, right? And what the point I'm trying to make is that you have to make F&B an experiential thing, and hotels are not necessarily doing that. You know, for a hotel, it's a coffee shop, it's an Italian restaurant, and that's it. And you know, you expect people to walk in. It's not going to happen. Leavenwood Fire, this is my partner's restaurant in Dubai. No alcohol. Let me warn you, when you walk into this restaurant, you will have a hole in your pocket. It is expensive. We are spending close to $150 to $200 without alcohol for it. It's a 1-star Michelin restaurant. The best hamburgers money can buy. And you can have 2 or 3 of them because they're really light. Zuma Dubai, most of you have heard about it, does crazy numbers, and while after COVID the numbers are down, it's still a very, very successful restaurant. And finally, a couple of slides on my restaurant. This is an Indian-Japanese fusion that we opened in Delhi, does extremely well. You know, again, and that's my next one, which I'm opening in a few months. Again, it's a South Indian, modern South Indian restaurant using different kind of cuisines from the coastal areas of India. We have tucked away an American speakeasy bar inside, which you have to get to through walking through the kitchen, and it's different. Some quick elements of that, and thank you for that. So, I'm going to make a quick introduction to our next speaker. Most of you do know Jesper. He played golf with us yesterday. Jesper, are you back?